All right, I apologize that we are a few minutes late this afternoon. I call to order the August 10th, 2020 Harris County Board of Public Education Board meeting. Would all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. First up on our list is going to be agenda approval. I'll take a motion when somebody's ready.
I move we approve the agenda as submitted.
Second.
Second was Amy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda is approved. Next up is going to be board chair observations. Had a lot to say coming in here today. I always have a lot to say, I guess. I want parents that are actually watching today or media or anybody that's paying attention to this today to know that we have seen your comments. I've heard your phone calls, your emails, your Facebooks, your Instagrams, and everything else that's going on. And we understand it's a difficult time for everybody, for our teachers, our staff, our leadership team. Had a call today from a single parent that has no options to either work or watch his third grade child. And I really feel for that because I'm a product of a single parent household. And as I said before, I know that if this happened back in, I don't want to date myself, but a long time ago, I probably at a 10 years old, 9 years old, would have been watching my sister, helping her with her kindergarten online stuff. And I realize how difficult that is. And we are going to try to get kids into school as quickly and as safely as possible when we are allowed. And I just want everybody out there to know that we hear you. I've listened to, and I'm sorry I haven't responded back to all the emails, but we hear you guys. And hang with us, and we'll all make it through, and we will be better for it eventually. That's all I really have to say. I'll pass the mic to anybody else that wants it. Anybody else?
So my sentiments would be pretty much the same. I'm also a product of my mom raising my brother and I, and we were those kids that were, third grade, fourth grade, home alone because my mom had to work. And I know how hard this is for a lot of our parents. And I really, the same sentiment that I would like to apologize because I always respond to every email that I get. I was just getting 40 emails a day, could not respond to every single one of them. But I hear you. I want the kids back into school today. I'm not gonna wait too long to get them back into school. And I'd also like the parents to kind of note, so for me, you probably are all wondering what's going to make you feel comfortable. But for me, even if the cases are rising here in Henderson County, as long as our hospitals aren't overwhelmed and our deaths are not up high, we all get the flu. We all get sick. And so I'm expecting that that's going to be the norm, that, the cases will rise once people start getting out past the summer. And the most important place for our children to be is in schools. And we all realize that. And I really, the last few weeks, month, I guess it's been, I've grieved. My husband said to me, I've never seen you like this over a decision. I've never seen you so stressed out, just like dealing with family with my children, of course, my older boys, so stressed out that you've cried. Like nothing has ever done this, I think, to any of us. So we're all struggling to make the best decision, and we're not making this lightly. We're not, don't care about those children that are gonna need that extra help. It's keeping us all awake at night. And so we're going to do the best that we can do to get them in school as quick as we can, as safe as we can.
Thank you, Ms. Holt. Anyone else? All right, we're going to move along. Next up is going to be public comments. We have 2 public comments today. That's down quite a bit from last time. The first is going to be read by Coach Rick Wood.
This is from Emily Edmonds, Hendersonville. What do the circumstances look like under which the school board will allow a Plan B to open? What are the deciding factors? COVID will not disappear and will affect the entire 2021 school year. So what is the next step following the first 6 weeks in Plan C? What preparations and funding are necessary in order for Plan B to materialize? Issues I would like the school board to consider include: 1, we all want safety first, and that includes understanding that virtual school poses real safety risk for many children, specifically those under supervised and those living with abuse and mental health issues. 2, I am also concerned that Plan C is not providing equitable education for children with limited or no supervision and reduced resources. Logistically, not all families are able to supervise virtual learning. Parents who work, parents whose first language is not English, children without internet access or transportation to hotspots are all left trembling, trying to figure out how to work with these real impediments. Internet disparities are not solved by providing hotspots and parking lots. Additionally, families with multiple students cannot provide consistent internet access to multiple Chromebooks via hotspots. 3, recognizing the dangers of too much screen time depending on this medium as an easy solution is negligent. We should be sensitive to our children's internet tolerance threshold and realize that we can't expect them to hold their attention for hours of online exercises. Even live classes will not suffice. There is incalculable value in 3D spatial learning, in group social interaction, in village learning. 4, lastly, children with special needs are definitely left to fall behind without access to the unique learning strategies and resources of in-person interaction from specialized teachers and therapists. I have a daughter in the Exceptional Children's Program who has already regressed in multiple areas of her intellectual and functional development, despite the best efforts of her teachers and myself to adapt and make a virtual IEP work. Please consider Plan B, adaptations for the Exceptional Children's Program.
Thank you.
So,
Yes, sir. The second one is going to be read by Ms. Holt.
So this is from Hannah Parks, and it reads, the HCPS mission is to provide all students with the opportunity to learn. A fully virtual return to learn fails adequately to accommodate students with disabilities and socioeconomic disadvantages. It also fails to provide optimal learning environment for our youngest learners, grades K through 2. We know that 1 in 6 children ages 13 to 17 years old in the U.S. have developmental disabilities. These children struggle to use technology due to physical, emotional, and mental challenges. How can a child use the computer for classwork if they have no control over their hands to type? How can a child engage with their virtual class if excessive sensory input overwhelms their processing ability? How are students with IEPs and 504s being served in a virtual setting? I challenge the school board to consider how virtual learning leaves behind children with disabilities and exceptional circumstances. We know that young children learn best when they are physically and emotionally engaged with their learning environment. A July 15, 2020 report, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine emphasized that young children in particular will be impacted by not having in-person learning and may suffer long-term academic consequences if they fall behind as a result. The report went on to state that young learners are poorly suited to virtual learning as their bodies and minds are developmentally unequipped to navigate the challenges of virtual learning. We all know that there are better ways to protect our children's right to learn. Public health leaders have released numerous strategies for moving forward with in-person learning. No-touch temperature checks, mask wearing, sick day guidelines, desk spacing and barriers, hand washing, and small classes or pods are some of the many tools available. Failure to prioritize the learning needs of vulnerable population hurts our community. Our children deserve better. I call on the HCPS school board to reconsider their decision and offer in-person learning to grades K through 2 English language learners, ELL, and exceptional children, EC, in the fall. Sincerely, Hannah Parks.
Thank you, Ms. Holt. Next is going to be our consent agenda. I'll take the motion when you're ready.
I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Case, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent's approved. Next up's old business. Dr. John Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Craven and members of the board. You'll see under old business, there are 4 policies that were part of our spring policy update from the North Carolina School Boards Association. Each of those are being brought to you today for approval. They come to you after first reading at our last meeting with no noted revisions. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Anybody have questions on A, B, C, D of second reading? All right, I'll take a motion.
I move we approve the policies listed under A, B, C, and D under old business for second.
Second.
Approved for second reading.
Second, Mr. Wood. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those are approved for second reading. All right, let's move on to approval of our emergency use of transportation funds.
Thank you, Mr. Craven. And again, members of the board, this approval comes to you with regard to the use of yellow buses for the purposes of meal transportation in our community. You remember when we were during the school closure period, we began to expand our meal distribution across our school community when it related to not just our meals on the bus routes, but also the utilization of yellow buses to deliver those meals and provide that. Child nutrition directors across the state were made aware of some expectations in order that that would be able to continue in the 2020-2021 school year as it relates to that. And they essentially provided direction to local boards of education and child nutrition directors that there were 3 conditions that would be required in the event that you would continue to utilize transportation, or specifically transportation dollars that are dedicated to your yellow bus traffic in that way. And those 3 conditions are listed on the cover memo here for you. And so in short, it requires that a local board of education approve the use of these $056 or transportation funds for the emergency use of meal transportation and meal delivery during that period of time. We continue to await further guidance from the state as it relates to actual flexibility with regard to funding and funding opportunities, but it was important for us to bring this to you as a board and our transportation director, as well as our child nutrition director, so that you would have approved that if and when we get to that point. As we talk about moving forward, we want to be able to continue to serve meals in our community, and we may need to use yellow buses in order to do so in areas, and we want to make sure that we have your permission to utilize that funding in the upcoming school year. So that's what this is here requesting your approval to do.
But we can't do this until
The third condition would be met. Yes, ma'am, that's correct. That flexibility would be granted. So you would be essentially granting us that flexibility. And so as soon as it were approved at the state level, then we could move forward just as we did in the spring.
And that is dependent upon the governor or the legislature?
The office of the governor is the one who provides that response for us, but I'm sure it is also conditional on the legislator as well.
If we go to phase 3, is that still an emergency declaration based on the governor?
I would hate to speculate on that. I'm not sure.
It most likely would be.
It most
because-
likely would be,
because-
right?
because
As long as
phase
there's a
two and the-
phase.
Phase 2 and the extensions of phase 2 have all been through executive order,
Okay,
unless we see the General Assembly do something different.
right. All right, anybody else have any questions?
Are we going to go over the meals on the bus, what the lunches and all that's going to look like, or should we ask that question now?
I can speak to that when we get to the general operations
Okay.
at the end. Yes, ma'am,
Okay.
absolutely, because we posted that information, so I'll speak to that.
Yeah, that's part of the reentry that we can talk about.
Okay.
If there's no more questions, I'll take a motion.
I move that the Henderson County Board of Public Education approve the emergency use of transportation funds for delivery of student meals when all three conditions required are met.
Oh, a second.
Second, sorry.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
All right, next up, we have quite a few policies here that appear to be broken up from two policies that we had before, and now they're just lengthier.
Yes, sir, very much so. So I'm going to offer a little bit of context. Thank you, Mr. Craven. Just when we thought there'd be no new policies, there is a whole series of 6 new policies, and these are special policy updates from the North Carolina School Board Association. I'm going to go back to May for just one second. In May, the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, issued new guidelines and regulations under Title IX. Since then, schools and school boards across the nation have been reviewing those new regulations and those new requirements, specifically the folks with the North Carolina School Board Association who provide us our policy manual. So what they've done is in late July, actually July 29th, they sent us these updated guidelines to their client school boards across the state and said, here's what needs to be in place in order that you meet those expectations and those new rules and regulations take effect August 14th. And so I'll let Dean speak to this in just a second, but it is advised that this is not just read for first reading today, but that you actually consider each of these 6 new policies for approval at this time so that they are automatically in effect to meet the guidelines from the U.S. Department of Education under Title IX. So you have 6 new policies, but with the advent of those 6 new policies, it actually requests that the Board of Education consider rescinding 2 policies, older policies that now are not applicable and essentially need to be thrown in the trash basket, if you will, in order that you can move forward with these 6 new ones. So as I've shared with a couple of you who I've talked to individually, these are not us drafting out loud at home and thinking, all right, we need much longer, more restrictive guidelines and much more specific and rigid guidelines for how we operate under Title IX. This is coming from the U.S. Department of Education. These policies are being brought to you exactly as they have been drafted as model policies from the North Carolina School Boards Association. And because it's a federal guideline, they are expected to take effect on August the 14th. So the first 6 are related to that. I'll work through them for just a second and we can have questions. Dean, is there anything you would want to add or amend to what I just shared there as it relates to the federal guideline?
I'll just add a couple things. So the new regulations, and this is the first time the Department of Ed has issued Title IX regulations specific to sexual harassment, sexual assault, and sexual violence. Over the past 10 to 15 years, they've been very active in releasing guidance on sexual harassment, sexual assault, and sexual violence in higher ed and K-12 and how we should address that. And our policies reflected that guidance pretty well. So this is the first time that they have used their regulatory authority to do it. And it came out in May, and Secretary DeVos was very adamant that it would go into effect by the beginning of this academic term. That sent everybody into really a high scramble mode when they were already trying to figure out which way was which in regards to the pandemic. It took the School Board Association really until about 3 weeks ago to publish their model policy because it was that hard to figure out how we overlay these policies with our already existing due process framework for students and employees, because it does imply it applies to employee on student sexual harassment as well as employee on employee sexual harassment, which is totally something new under Title IX. I did not envy the School Board Association's task on drafting these model policies. They are very complicated. We're still kind of winding our way through them as well. We have stood up some initial guidance for all of our clients on Title IX, and we'll be kind of sending out recommendations because the new regulations require people to hold certain roles, like an investigator, decision makers, appeal authority, those sorts of things, and that they have specific training to that, which includes relatively a heavy amount of legal training too, to understand the standards of evidence and relevancy in a proceeding. And so we're working through those issues too. But I'll also tell you, the regulations were kind of designed for higher ed, and are much easier, I think, from a policy perspective to implement. The fact that we already have kind of hearings in our student discipline modes and employee modes makes it very, very difficult. And that's kind of the reason why it took so long to get it. But otherwise, it's just kind of one more thing on an extremely full plate in the middle of a large buffet. But we're getting it. So I'll let you go ahead through the policies, and happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you. I'll direct all questions to Dean Shetley as it relates to the policies. But what he did mention, I would just reiterate this far, as we work through this, because as you've reviewed them, you can see the layers of detail associated with these policies. We are very fortunate to have legal counsel like Campbell Shatley, who has already conducted trainings for us as it relates to our school administrators and our school leadership team. We will continue to work through them as we talk about what our procedures look like. We want to make sure that that people are adequately trained, and that's not a one-time event. We realize that that's going to be an ongoing piece. So it's going to be critical for us along those lines. So I'll start with 1710, new policy 1710. 4020 and 7230. Again, this deals with discrimination and harassment prohibited by federal law. Specifically, I would note the first line there. This new policy supersedes in part existing policies 1710, 4021, 7230, and then 1720, 4015, and 7225. Again, noting why we are considering rescinding policies at the end, that these new policies supersede that. And this policy specifically prohibits discrimination and harassment based on certain characteristics protected by federal law. You see those listed there, but excludes sex, and it provides reporting and investigative processes for complaints of policy violations. I would be glad to attempt to answer any questions that you have about the policy. Yes, ma'am.
So a lot of the problems we have in schools are not happening at school, the harassment stuff, it's happening in the home and next door, and then it spills over. So this covers, we can go with that also.
Certainly, yes. As many school administrators will tell you, one of our responsibilities is no matter when we find it out, we have an obligation to investigate and then to report it to whatever the authority is that it's connected with. And oftentimes, once we know there's what we call a nexus, like there's something that happens at school that then connects that event to an issue that happens at school, we have a responsibility to address it in that way as well. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then my other question on that one is, what if a kid says, Miss Jones or whoever, the teacher, heard this, but didn't report it, didn't do anything about it? And it says here, it can be disciplinary action up to and including dismissal.
Yes,
So
ma'am,
that's-
absolutely. So everybody, again, has the responsibility of what this
Report it.
regulation expects. And so if we hear that someone had knowledge of an event and did not appropriately report it or adequately notify their proper supervisor, then that is part of our investigation, is to determine whether or not there's credibility to that as well. And then our personnel would also deal with that accordingly.
Okay. And tell us how teachers are being trained with this new law.
Yes, ma'am. So kind of as you just heard Mr. Shatley mention before, the first and foremost, we have an obligation to train our administrators detailed with that. And then we have a series of trainings that will go on for our individual school employees. And then that will be ongoing training that has to go on for them, because there's a lot of depth here. So when you think about the trainings we do at the beginning of a school year, Title IX training now becoming many of those trainings in the same way we train for a lockdown drill or for a fire drill or bloodborne pathogens. And then there are ongoing trainings that would be part of that as well, as we discover kind of what the roles and responsibilities are.
And if a teacher is confidently told by a student that so-and-so, say a date rape, that teacher must report.
Right. Confidentiality, as public school employees will tell you, only exists as far as our legal obligation to report. People ask us all the time, can you promise me that you won't tell someone? And the way we train our employees is you can promise them that you will report everything you are legally obligated to report. And so if we hear something from someone, even if it's shared with us in confidence, but we have a legal obligation to report it, staff have to do so. It's a great question. It's probably one of the hardest places, Ms. Case, that a teacher or an educator will find themselves in, is when a child or a family member says to them, please don't tell anybody this because I trust you and I need to trust you.
Well, that doesn't just, North Carolina, that doesn't just fall to teachers. Everyone's a mandatory reporter.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
And so this isn't this isn't necessarily new,
Right.
but it is putting it into an 18-page
Right. I think just
Well,
so many
everybody's a
people view us-
mandatory reporter
But
of
that's-
child abuse.
for child abuse.
For
yeah.
child abuse. So, you know, a student telling a teacher that they were date raped would not fit that necessarily that definition of child abuse unless the person was a caregiver. But certainly, I think the responsibility is all on us to report these things.
Yes, sir.
And to ensure that law enforcement knows about it and to report it up the chain so we can investigate it, whether it happens. But I think, too, to kind of just add a little dichotomy to Ms. Case's question is that the new Title IX regulations don't apply to sexual misconduct that occurs off campus. They used to. The Title IX guidance used to apply to anything that occurred off campus that could make its way to campus. But under the new Department of Education regulations, it doesn't apply if it occurs off campus or is not at a school event, which is really interesting. And again, I think it has to do with the higher education aspect of it. They didn't want something that happens in an apartment complex, you know, a mile down the road from the university to affect how the university handles a particular situation. So it still doesn't mean if we find out about it, we don't report it to law enforcement, though. If somebody reports it to us, and if it's certainly, and as Dr. Brown said, if there's a nexus that we investigate, determine that there's not going to be any disruption to the school and provide supportive measures to the alleged victim if necessary.
But if it's spilled over into the school and a fight occurs, then we investigate.
Sure, and we might even investigate even if it doesn't necessarily spill over into the school, just to ensure that that the alleged victim is safe and the rights of everyone are maintained and they can come to school. I mean, you know, if somebody is sexually assaulted by a classmate outside of the school and they have to go to school every day with that classmate, that's an issue, and that we're going to have to face one way or the other. So.
Any other questions about 1710?
Yeah, at page, the last page, second to last page, page 10.
Okay.
The contact information for the designated civil rights coordinators is as follows, and it says that we need to fill these in before adopting these policies. And Section 504 coordinator, an ADA coordinator, an age discrimination coordinator, and the coordinator for other non-discrimination laws. When are we filling that out?
We would be doing that as soon as possible. So, for example, our ADA coordinator is already set, our 504 coordinator is already set. So we
But
would,
an age discrimination coordinator and a
right. As
coordinator of
Mr.
other-
Shatley was saying, we kind of have to assign roles and responsibilities to everybody as it relates to that. But we would be doing that as soon as possible.
But if we're adopting this policy today, then we need to do that.
Well, this is first reading, right?
Well,
No,
we are going to end up skipping first reading. We have to adopt these policies today
Oh,
to be eligible for August
August
14th, which is
Correct.
Right.
2
My
days away.
apologies for that being linked here. Can they approve without those being filled out right now?
Yeah, because
that can change.
it can always change.
Sure.
So I don't necessarily mind you all approving. The age discrimination coordinator is going to most likely be your HR person. So it's going to be Mr. Rhodes. The coordinator for other non-discrimination laws most likely would be your same person who's your Title IX coordinator too, I would think, but that could certainly vary as well. But I don't mind you all approving this without that information if you all feel comfortable doing that, because it can always change as people's roles and responsibilities change.
When
Okay.
will this be up and linked on the website?
We would normally do that hopefully within the week once we send it to
And then
School
you
Board
just have it
Association.
done.
Yes, ma'am.
You could put your name because you have to do everything anyway.
Fortunately, Mr. Rhodes is many of those things. So I know some of them, and I'm glad to say that his name will be there, not me for those. But we'll get that picked up. Thank you, sir.
John, how are students going to find this out? That they can be a complainant, they can bring charges and stuff. and
So we have
parents?
some responsibilities for notification that involve putting things on our website, including in our student code of conduct. That's one of the things that has to be revised immediately upon these approvals. So when we provide those notifications to our students and they review the student code of conduct, as well as all of those relative disclosures, that would be part of how we notify them.
And parents,
Same. Yes, ma'am.
that 20% that do not have internet, how are they going to know? The parents and the,
Well, there's also some responsibilities for providing hard copy notifications to people, whether it be in the front office or via our alert messaging system. So when you think about how we provide notifications right now when we're educating people, you might get an alert phone call from me that says, review this information, or you might even be provided a hard copy at your school. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions on this policy? Now let's move on to the next.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Craven. And 1720, 4030, 7235 deals with Title IX non-discrimination on the basis of sex, and so that's separated. This policy is intended to meet the board's obligation to provide notice of non-discrimination on the basis of sex, and it declares the policy of non-discrimination on the basis of sex in the programs and activities of the school system. Glad to answer any questions.
Yeah, same question. Title IX coordinator just wasn't filled out.
Similarly, yes, sir. I'll update those on each of the policies.
Any other questions on this policy? All right, we'll move on to D.
1725, 4035, and 7236 as it relates. This supersedes, again, policy 1710, 4020, and 7230. And it is required to comply with the board's obligation not to discriminate on the basis of sex. It specifically prohibits sexual harassment and provides a reporting process and mandatory response protocol to meet the requirements of the federal law as set out in the new Title IX regulations. Glad to answer any questions.
John,
Yes,
if
ma'am.
an employee is dismissed because of what the investigation finds out, and he goes to or she goes to another state, is this personnel, do we put this in the personnel file, and does it follow them to another state?
So I think there are a couple of questions there. The first of those relates to, I think, employee records as it relates to that. And I think it's important to understand that employee records don't follow the employee unless the employee provides them to the upcoming employer or they're specifically requested as part of that process. But a personnel file would not follow them. But anytime there's an investigation or information that's put into an employee record, it would be held in our personnel records.
You can also, depending on the case, we could appeal to remove the license. So therefore, if you're worried about a teacher going out of state, we work through Dean and Chris to start working on the teacher's license as well. So therefore, they may not have a teaching license.
Questions? All right, next, Mr. Bryant, Dr. Bryant.
All right, and then 1726, 4036, and 7237. Again, this supersedes an additional policy related to the complaint procedure in part, and it provides a new grievance process for resolving formal complaints of sexual harassment in a manner that complies with the requirements of federal law set out in the new Title IX regulations. And this is that grievance process outlined. Be glad to answer any questions.
Next up.
Thank you, sir. Bullying and harassment behavior prohibited. That is 4329 and 7311. Specifically in this policy, you'll see that it again supersedes parts of two previous policy, and then it satisfies the board's obligation under the general statute to have a policy that prohibits bullying and harassing behavior. Glad to answer any questions.
Having flashbacks of like the past 2 years of doing these.
Yes, sir.
over and over
You think
and
you're
over
having
and
flashbacks?
over.
Yeah, exactly. I'm fine.
Start having a tick.
I'm okay.
He had a nervous twitch in the
That's
meeting.
exactly
I
right.
bet.
Exactly right.
All right, last one, G.
Yes, sir. Last one new is 7232. And this is a new policy to address the board's obligations to provide a workplace that is free of harassment and discrimination. This was previously addressed in the two policies you see referenced. And again, it addresses the federal law that prohibits discrimination in employment, including Title VII. Glad to answer any questions.
Like many of our policies, these are all needed, but there's no choice. This
These are by law.
keeps us following the federal
Yep.
requirement.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Corn. Exactly right. Simply restating the law.
Okay, so any other questions on G, discrimination and harassment in the workplace? All right, if not, we're going to take B through G. Mr. Shatley, will you give us the wording on how we can?
Yes, sir. My recommendation is that you pass this while also waiving first reading. So the motion would be I move to waive first readings on the approval of policies B through G and approve them on second reading.
Do I have a motion?
So move what he just
I was
said.
just gonna say.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, policies B through G are approved. So let's go through What's the rescind?
So with that in mind, Mr. Craven, there are two policies that are currently in our policy manual that now have been superseded by the series that you just approved.
Yep.
So H and I are simply the board's approval to remove them from your policy manual and rescind them formally.
I'll
You can
accept
just
the
vote to
motion.
remove.
We can do the same thing for,
You can just do it just flat out. No need to waive anything. Just vote to remove.
I'll take a motion.
I move we rescind both the policies listed in H and I.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? They are rescinded. All right, now on to the fun stuff. Mr. Bo Caldwell,
Sure.
this is going to be our reentry report.
Reentry report. Let's talk about reentry, and I'm going to kind of divide it up into several major topics and have several of my staff members present to you. Number one, of course, you remember the last time we were here, we voted for option C. I hope people do realize that it was not your choice to say that all children were going to come back to school every day. And so therefore, you've got to remember that our goal is to move to B. But when we move to B, there's still going to have to be childcare issues because all children at this point cannot come back at one time. So please remember that when our goal is to get students back into the building. That is our goal. Let's talk about reentry. And first, let's talk about where we are with C right now. There's not a harder working person in the last probably 3 weeks than this person to the left of me. She's here before I get here. I give her a little math problem when I get ready to leave. I said, 2 minus 1 is what? And she said, well, it's 1. I said, well, that's how many cars are left in the parking lot. You're it. She stays late. But it's been important for her while we're in this virtual learning. And I know we hear that it's not great and this is not what's best for children. But I can tell you, what we're providing will be the best virtual option of any school system. And I like for her to take time to go through and tell you the difference on what basically is this spring to what's happening this fall. I think you as a board need to know that. Let's talk virtual learning, okay? Dr. King.
Thank you. So we know that it needed to look differently. We know that last spring we were in what I would call a reactionary or kind of emergency remote learning mode. And we've learned now what we didn't know. We've learned that we can do a better job. We've learned that sometimes when a decision is made at the state level, it impacts people's engagement level. For example, a lot of our students, to be honest with you, when they heard their grade couldn't go down, their engagement level went down very quickly. But we also had teachers who had never planned to be an online teacher. We know that because we actually employ some teachers to be online teachers through our Henderson County virtual public classes. And so all of a sudden we were throwing everybody into virtual. And so the graphic that you've seen in the Return to Learn update, what you're going to see is live teaching. And that will hit probably 80% or more of our students, depending on their childcare situation. But we know that a lot of our older students probably, if they have internet access or can get to internet access, will join live instruction. They'll see their teacher, they'll see their classmates and have interaction. For our students who don't have internet capability, we have ordered lots of flash drives that will work with a Chromebook even when they're not at school. We've additionally turned on the feature that students can go to an internet hub, download their work, be in a non-Wi-Fi environment, work on it, and then go back later and upload it.
Can I stop you there for one question?
Yes.
I know part of what we're doing is the attendance model. How are we going to adjust that for those students that don't have that live internet at home?
I appreciate you asking that because I think if I were a parent who didn't have internet, I would be concerned about my child being counted absent. And luckily, the state has answered that for us. There are a couple of ways that students can be counted present. One is to show up in class in their virtual classroom. Another way is to simply have a two-way communication with their instructor that day. That can be two-way on email, two-way on phone. But it can also, you can be counted present just by turning in and completing your assignments. And so we've never turned on the feature where our teachers can go back and count a student present, because we were talking about physical presence. But now if a student turns their work in, it can be 8 days later, the teacher will be able to go back and mark the student present.
On the flash drives, how many days worth of work are you anticipating putting on those?
We've ordered 64 gigs, and what we realized is last year we were doing about a 2-week rotation, and that feedback loop is not fast enough. Students need more frequent feedback. So we're looking at ways that we can make it much more frequent.
So weekly or?
Well, we're hoping maybe even if we have those child nutrition buses working, we might be sending some things out on the bus as well, so that we can have a much more consistent feedback loop.
Okay.
So in a sense, and I'm just kind of reiterating, so like, for instance, like our McKinney-Vento students that don't have access to that, they could do their work, then they can just turn in that and it'll count back on there.
Correct.
Because some of those like to work. So if they are going to work right now, they can do their schoolwork later and then turn it in.
Yeah, the state reporting manual shows 4 ways that you can be in attendance, and we'll actually start school taking paper attendance this way to make sure we can find all of those students out and about. But we'll record, did they join you virtually? Did you talk to them in a 2-way, not a voicemail, a 2-way phone conversation? Did you have an internet email exchange with them? And then our 5th one that we're just not happy with is I keep trying and I can't contact them. But what that will do is narrow down that list of kids for us on day 1, day 2, so that we can send social workers and counselors to potentially go do home visits and find our students if we.
And that's how you're going to deal with truancy if that becomes an issue as well?
Yes, sir.
What about our ADM? Is that the 20th day this year?
Well, yes, ma'am. Right now, it still is. It's the 20-day, and then it's the 40-day, and then which one is ever the highest. Right now, we have appealed to the General Assembly to give us grace on that, because we have heard that to be honest with you, our ADM is not where it needs to be. We have some parents who have pulled their children for homeschool and for other reasons. So therefore, we're waiting. We're doing our best. We're working through our lobbyists, through the Superintendents Association, to see if we can't get this ADM basically waived, because they have prepared for us a projected number. And if they would just allow to fund us on that projected number, then we would be okay, like other school systems. And once again, this is just not for Henderson County. And talking to all my fellow superintendents across the state of North Carolina, this has been an issue. It's going to be an issue, Ms. Holt.
Has a bill already been, I thought I read in one of the legislative reports that there was a bill. Has there already been a bill?
The House, I
introduced?
think right now, and I'm not sure of a bill, but I know the House has been working on this and is very supportive of working up something that will give us basically some grace during this
Seemed
time.
like it was let the ADM stay the same as
It
last
may
year.
be, but it's coming from the House side. I don't know, Dean, if
Okay.
you've heard anything, but I know, like I said, nothing's been officially passed at this time.
Nothing's been passed.
Right.
I know there's lots of push for it, but nothing has been passed.
Last question I had on that is hotspots. I know, they're hard to get. They're on back order. Some of the hotspots don't work at some people's homes, even if you have them. Where are we at with hotspots?
Mr. Fender's going to tell me if I misspeak, but he got another order in today.
Oh, good.
So some that were on back order. One of the issues we're dealing with is that every school system's ordering the same
Sure.
thing.
So how many do we have? $365 hotspots as of right now. And we had 17%, no, what was the percentage of kids that didn't have internet access?
It varies. One of the things we're struggling, and Mr. Fender's staff is working so well on, is some of our families have internet. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily reliable
Sure.
internet. And so he's trying to geomap those addresses to see, even if we hand you a hotspot, will it even work where you live?
Mhm.
Because some of the rural areas in our district, even a hotspot's not going to help them have internet access.
I think he just said he was ordering more too.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any idea when those would come in? All right, thank you.
One other piece that I think is a big difference from the spring, that I'm excited about. In the spring, our buildings were closed by executive order to students. This fall, in the afternoon, by appointment, very small groups of students or even one-on-one, students can come in for tutoring. They can come in for academic support to meet with a teacher because the buildings are not closed. What that will do for us is help us have some practice with, that screening at the front door as they come in, the sign-in procedures, having all of those students tracked and logged. And so I'm excited about the option for some students to come get support by appointment.
Dr. King, talk a little bit about orientation, if you don't mind, for a certain number of groups that we're bringing in face-to-face for one day.
Absolutely. Our superintendent, has a heart for I'll start with, before I talk about students, our beginning teachers. And it pained this man to have beginning teacher orientation virtually, but we did 2 days of that last week. And he also has a heart for kids at transition levels. And so you think about your first time in kindergarten, your first time maybe even in first grade, first time in sixth grade, first time you've gone to middle school, or your first time as a high school student. And for those transition years, we have staggered orientations in person. In that orientation, especially in the younger grades, is not just for the student, but to get a Chromebook in the hands of those families, to teach the parents a little bit about Google Classroom and how to access that. And so we will be having staggered orientation for ninth graders the end of this week, the 12th, 13th, and 14th. And then staggered orientation for kindergarten, first, and sixth, the 17th, 18th, and 19th.
And you got to remember, it's not required. It's up to the parent where they would like to come. There's a virtual aspect of it as well, but it's important for us to get those parents and those children into the school and let them meet with their teacher on a one-day shot.
So we have orientation for our K16, 17th, 18th, and 19th. When is their first day of live direct instruction with lessons going to start?
It'll be the 20th.
The 20th for all.
For all kids or just K?
Just those transition. Everybody else starts the 17th.
So everybody else starts the 17th. There's no other transition period.
Correct.
Thanks,
Now,
transitioning.
I know we'll have glitches on the 17th.
Sure.
So I'm going to use transition lightly
Right.
because we're going to have to figure out some things, I'm sure, when we launch this, Google Classroom Meet codes and all those things. But we'll get it figured out.
How are our server capabilities? We're going to be using an awful lot of bandwidth to be able to get all of our teachers. They're in the classroom actually using it. How are we looking as far as that goes?
You're monitoring that daily? Monitoring that. And with our hero be
Okay.
I didn't think about that.
ready to surprise.
Right. And I believe if Mr. Fender will agree, I think they're also looking at maybe turning some things off to help other things work. Like there may be some things outside the school where there may not be that many people coming to outside the school to take those off to add more bandwidth inside as well. So I think that if you see what we're doing with Plan C, with virtual learning, Dr. King, if you don't mind, speak to if a parent has childcare, say with a grandmother who knows absolutely nothing about technology, but they want to work with their child, say from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the evening, where the child can play in the morning. How could that happen?
So the morning classes, the 8 to 12, all direct instruction. Think of Minilessons. I'm hesitant to use the word lecture because I don't want you to imagine an hour-long lecture, but think of that. That will be recorded and posted in the student's Google Classroom so that if a caregiver is unable to help the student during the day and the student's actually doing that schoolwork at night, they'll see the same instruction from that teacher. They might not see all 4 hours of it because we probably won't record and hang when 20 minutes people are silently reading. That would, I think, frustrate parents to watch 4 hours of that. But all of the direct instruction, the mini lessons, will be the classroom teacher in the student's Google Classroom. So they can watch it that night if they can't join live.
And Dr. King, with some of these same things, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but some of the same tools that we're using now will go to B, correct? In other words, if a child is in class 1 week but not in class the next week, is the same type of issues you're still going to have, the same type of instruction going to be there?
Absolutely. When we move to B, B is a concurrent model. So you have about a third of your students, a third to a half of your students in person. And then you've got some students who are learning at home, but they're joining at the same time. It would be like if somebody was joining this meeting remotely. Like I know a lot of people are watching, but they're not able to interact. But in class, they'll be able to interact. Same thing, we will be recording it, putting it in the Google Classroom. I know we've worked to make sure that we are okay to record students, but we are not posting these publicly. They're not on YouTube. They're not on a website. It's the same thing as seeing your classmate when you go to class. It's only in the student's Google Classroom.
So with the question, so if they're on the flash drive thing, would they get a copy of the lessons on that flash drive at that point, or no? Because if they don't have any, and they're relying fully on that flash drive. So would they not see any of that recording pretty much?
They might not see the recording that shows their classmates. They might get a mini lesson the teacher has recorded, right? But they might not have the one that has their classmates on there.
And I also would encourage you that to do an all call, pointing parents to the Return to Learn technology video that Amber, right? I'm like Amber, because I met them both
Amber
at the same
Garvey,
time.
yes.
Yeah, that she did. It was, I don't know how many of you saw it, but it was amazing. It walked everybody through how to go through Google Classroom. I learned stuff that I didn't even know, and I was on Google Classroom with my 2 children that were school aged all spring. It was an amazing video, and I think if parents have that to go back to, I don't know how many people, they may scan it and see a video. Oh, I don't know if I have time to do that, but every second of that video was worth watching. So I would encourage us to maybe link it on like the homeschool pages and everything. It was great.
It's great.
Are those lessons ADA compliant? Are we typing out all the words that the teachers are saying?
We would have to do that if we were putting out in a public venue, but the ones that we are doing daily, we will only do if we have a student who has that need in that classroom.
Okay.
And we certainly will do it for those students.
Okay, awesome. Now, August 20th, kindergarten starts. I'm sitting at the table with my kindergartner, and I'm scared. And tell me what this is going to look like. What am I going to be doing for 4 hours with my son? And I also have 2 other kids that I've got to help. Explain to me how that's going to look for me.
Sure. So I'll give a lot of credit to Miss Marlowe, our elementary ed director, specific to elementary. She has made and worked with our instructional coaches to make sample kindergarten, first grade, second grade schedules that build in breaks. We have the same concerns as the letter writer about screen time and what's developmentally appropriate. And so there will be built-in breaks. There will be 45-degree your computer, get up, walk around, read a book. But we're being careful because we know that there are churches in our community that are providing childcare for them. So I think you'll see teachers being careful about their language. They may not say, go run around outside, because if a student's in a place somewhere that they can't run around outside, but they'll use terms like take a break, go silent, read a book, stand up and stretch, those sort of things. So I think you should expect frequent breaks because depending on the student's age, we don't want them staring at a screen.
No, absolutely. I think, my daughter's going into 2nd grade, and for her and for my oldest son, I've talked about it's going to be a lot easier, once they get into it. They'll remember how to do it. It's, my youngest has used a tablet, a very generic little Amazon little tablet to do whatever. But actually using a Chromebook's a whole nother ball of wax. Letters, numbers, returns. There's so much more functionality to it, and also a lot more danger in my household for him to be able to use that. So how are we going to teach them how to even use a Chromebook?
So there's this wonderful little thing called a Clever badge. It's going to be a parent's best friend.
Okay.
It already is. And so when kindergartners go to their orientation, they'll get their Clever badge. When they launch the computer, it takes a photo of their badge. It's essentially a QR code, but it will take the student to their menu and their classes. So it does remove a lot of the typing in passwords and typing in It's a
Yeah,
handy dandy
It does
shortcut.
all that. It is
Yeah,
cool.
our parents need to know this. These are the questions that I've been hearing, the emails I've been getting. How do I do this? And we need to get that information out. We need to.
Orientation isn't that great.
It is, but if you can't make the 2 hours there, the 2 hours there, you might not be able to make orientation because it's only 2 separate times and it's during the work week and the whole thing. So we need to over communicate this to our parents. I want parents to say, you've called me too much. You've emailed me too much. Not, where's my teacher? Where's my school? When do I get a Chromebook? What day do I go? We need to over communicate during this time.
Yes, sir.
Jan, since we're going to back to school with the evening, kids can come in, and with these 3 orientations, what of the safety stuff, I'm going to call it, has been delivered to the schools? Like, are the kiosks for the temperatures in the schools? What has been delivered to the schools?
Dr. Bryant will cover that here in just a few minutes. Great question there, Ms. Case. While we're still, on this, you're right, Ms. Craven, communication. I want parents to know, once again, the major difference between, if you look up there, between basically last spring and this fall, or the amount of instruction a child's going to get, plus if a child and or a parent needs help, have them call that school. Talk to the principal. I can't make the morning orientation.
Sure.
Okay, I got to work. We'll set an appointment and we will take care of that parent in the afternoon. Okay, the principal, they have to, will take care of that parent in the evening if it comes to it. So therefore, we're here to get the parents through this the best we can.
No, I mean, that's awesome to hear. And I just want to reiterate that we need to get that word to our parents, because I think a lot of folks are really frustrated right now, myself included, for a lack of communication from certain schools. And we want to make sure that we are really meeting parents where they're at, and making sure that we can deliver the best education that we possibly can with what we've got going on right now.
Okay. Any questions about virtual learning? Once again, please remember, this is going to be a carryover to B, because once we go to B, the child is not going to be in the classroom every day. So there'll be based learning and remote learning at the same time. So right now, all the children are going to be remote, but then we're going to transition to some are face-to-face and some are remote. And then hopefully, Ms. Holt, we'll get to A. I know you threw it out there on when we will get to A, so we will see. I certainly hope that we'll get to A soon.
Well, to piggyback on what Mr. Craven has said, I know we've been getting, or what we're a part of is the whole system, email or voicemails and on the phone, but I think principals, now that principals and teachers are supposed to be working full time as of today, I think they need to be the ones to call these parents. No, I don't have any kids, but I got some nieces, nephews with these kindergarten. What? I can't go those 2 days. I can't do this.
Yeah.
So that principal making those calls to all the parents in his or her school to say, I know these are our 2, but I'm willing to meet with you separately. Please call us at this. If not, I think the principal, that personal, would help instead of it all being the whole system.
Absolutely. And I think maybe what I'm trying to say here is I think this needs to be driven more by the principals, and it needs to be over communicated by them and not by Facebook. And the parent groups and the this group and the that group has different information for different whatevers. We need our principals to really step up their games and really communicate with us, because we're not there to be communicated with.
Several times this week, numerous times, principals need to be communicated.
Absolutely. Over communicate.
And have it clear and concise across the board.
Jan, we've had a lot of questions about special ed kids. How is this changed for special ed kids?
So all of our students with an individual education plan will be working with the parents to work on a remote learning contingency plan about how their IEP will work in a remote learning, because it really is different according to each individual student. I will say a shout out to our attorney's office. They have provided exceptional support to the Exceptional Children's Department. Ms. Shelton here has been working with our EC teachers so that we can try to meet every student's IEP goals, individual goals, through a remote learning platform. But we'll also be taking advantage of those afternoons, sometimes those in-person appointments to meet some of those goals and do some of the progress monitoring.
Isn't those classes, some of those EC classes, aren't they large enough to allow all of those students to come in at once? Like, for instance, the East ones and the ones at West. Those
Class sizes, yeah,
like that.
class sizes vary, but we've already started making appointments with some of our students to come in for afternoon support. Yeah.
And what about transportation for those economically disadvantaged to come in the evenings?
Right now, we haven't worked out a transportation plan, but as well, I feel like I need to back up and say, if a family doesn't want to come in, but they need an appointment, we're going to offer virtual appointments as well, because we understand some people might want that individual support, but not want to come to the building or not have transportation to come to the
If we
building.
get to use those buses, we can send the bus after that kid and bring them to school and take them home, if we get to use those buses.
We're trying to get creative, yes.
That has been part of the conversation.
So have you looked at all about possibly bringing in that demographic of children who are EC or who have IEPs? I mean, I know that it's a lot more for the children that have IEPs, but are special, like inclusion classes. I mean, I know you'd have to look at asking what teachers are willing to come in that are, that's their class and so on and so forth. But I know that would be huge.
As we look into Plan B and maybe eventually, Plan A, but Plan B for sure, there are groups of students that we know need some priority consideration. Preschool students, students with disabilities or learning differences, English language learners, students in foster care, students who are homeless. And so there are a variety of students who would probably need some priority consideration as we look into reentry.
Are we allowing the preschool, the WCCA classes to operate normally?
WCCA has already alerted their parents by letter that they plan to offer remote preschool.
Any questions about virtual learning? Reentry. Let's talk about school safety. What is our, I think, Ms. Case, thank you for the intro there to what have we done at our schools and what's going to continue to do at our schools, so we can start with B. Also, let's talk a little bit about transportation, and let's talk about feeding the kids and what we know as of right now. So Dr. Bryant.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. And I do appreciate that question, Ms. Case, as we talk about how we transition from a school safety standpoint. And I want to credit the man who may still be, yes, he is. He's still over my left shoulder there. We can all give a nod to Mr. Scott Massington. What I'm most proud to say is that he still works for us, because any sane person would have said, I retired from a very good job. I came to public education because I wanted to serve in my community. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, I didn't think this is what I'd be doing. But
Either.
yes, but to his credit, he has continued to work tirelessly, coordinating kind of the operational end of things. When you talk about what's already there, so there's a tremendous amount of signage as it relates to our expectations. There's been training going on with our employee groups, and the visitor management system, which you guys have seen here in our front office, that is a temperature scanning kiosk that functions digitally and allows an individual to be separate from that. Those have been delivered for all of our schools. They're being calibrated and coordinated, and we hope to have them all operational at all school sites by the end of this week. So when families start coming into school buildings, that's a visitor management tool that would be functional at all school sites in their main entryway.
So
Now we have to screen
one.
just one. Yes, sir. There's one at each main entrance.
How much are they? I'm sorry, the budget part.
They're a couple of $1,000s a piece. Yes, ma'am.
We can really use it for this time.
And so again, they're being used in the same way that you see them used at the main entrance to this building. Again, as part of the operational visitor management, we're utilizing touchless thermometers that we would screen individuals with. So students who are coming much in the same way that that expectation is required for schools as we move toward a face-to-face environment, that students have to be screened in that particular format. We continue to evaluate cleaning and disinfecting protocols, looking at resources that allow us to address large scale as we start moving into having kids in our facilities. As you have heard us kind of talking about with a hotspot particular piece, one of the most critical pieces with any PPE, and I'll just generalize that term, is that every school system's ordering the same stuff right now. And so Scott, again, to his credit, has been working very, very deliberately to research and determine all the different places that we can do that. And so we have what we consider to be a very healthy stock of that in supply that we'll be able to move forward with, but we know that it's getting harder and harder to get. And so as we start thinking about kids being in our classroom spaces and the expectations to do that, what we've done is we've prioritized those environments that you heard Dr. King talk about. When we think about providing safety protocols, when we start to bring kids in that space in small or scheduled places, whether those be EC students or special populations or our orientations, we're making sure that we're prioritizing the equipment there. I'd kind of draw your attention to thinking about when we did community feeding, as I sort of kind of transition to that piece. We had to make sure that those people were properly outfitted because they were the most regular interactors with our public. When it comes down to picking up a grab-and-go meal or otherwise. And so all of our safety protocols are in line with the recommendations and the requirements of the information that we've gotten from DHHS and from the Department of Public Instruction, but they continue to evaluate those. A good example of that I might give was the early guidance was such that younger children did not have to wear a face covering. You all remember that guidance then changed. And the guidance suggested no. In fact, all children in K-12 environments do. And so we have a stockpile of face coverings for which we can provide one to every student, every staff member. You see Mr. Shatley is wearing one of the featured, there you are, Mr. Craven. That is one that has already been provided to every single staff member in our school system. There are a number of logoed ones that schools did individually, or if you have an awesome administrative assistant, you got one for yourself. But there are a number of those that have been provided out. And so glad to kind of continue to provide updates as that stuff goes out.
What about somebody we don't ever mention is shields for the secretaries?
Yes,
because
ma'am.
they're the ones that's going to be hit up with people coming in.
We've ordered those. So those protective shields are kind of like the sneeze guards you would see in very public places. We've ordered one of those for every main office area. And so as soon as those come in, those will be installed.
So,
Go ahead.
sorry, I want to talk about this face mask thing. About 2 weeks ago, we made the trip, a week-long trip to Disney. And I felt very comfortable there, socially distanced. There were shields everywhere. There was hand sanitizer. I mean, you could stop 4 different places on your way into the ride to get them and then on the way out. And I felt like they did a great job. I was concerned because I have a 5-year-old that has autism, that she would keep a mask on. And I have an 8-year-old and then a 17-year-old that went. Brooklyn, the one with autism, I probably had to tell twice in the week, pull that mask up over your nose. Aaliyah Faith, I told her 947 times an hour, put your mask back on, put your mask back on, it was constant. Every Disney cast member knew my daughter, Princess, put your mask back up. So I know that this is what's going to happen just because kiddos can't do it. How are we going to address that? Because, I heard of one school system that was like, it was going to be suspension if they, kids didn't have them on. I just feel, when I think about that and the staff, I just feel so bad that it is going to be, so we're learning, put your mask back on, she'll go around the room and then it'll be back to, her trying to talk again. And how is that going to look?
I think the way you handled your child is that teacher right now, of course, is virtually, but when they get 10 kids in the class, then there may be that times 10. It's grace. And we keep telling our principals all the time to preach to their teachers that this is not normal times and there's got to be things. Right now, the issue, we don't look at masks, and us just speaking for myself, but we don't look at it as a disciplinary issue.
Right.
The issue is pull your mask up. Now, if you have a child that's walking around without one,
Right.
then i.e. the principal is going to ask the child, you've got to put a mask on. If the child basically refuses, then that's fine. You can go home and you can learn virtually till you
Right.
put a mask on, because this is the rule. It's not we're suspending you. It's not that we're denying you your education. It's if you want to stay home, then you call the parent and say, look, here's your child. Here's your option for your child.
What unless they claim exemption?
To claim exemption, then we'll just have to work through that
Okay,
exemption
so-
through there. And there are exemptions that we can work through.
Mm.
You're right. When we get to be, and hopefully we're going to get to be, there's always going to be that. I talked to a superintendent the other day, and that they were doing some small group of this Jumpstart, and he had a very upset second grade parent's mother who she sent him to school with a Power Ranger mask, and the other child, of course, had a Batman mask. And you know what they did at lunch? They swapped. So now the next thing you know, he's coming home with the Batman mask. She wants the child that has the Batman mask tested. She wants to know who the name
You
is.
laugh, but that's going to happen
Oh, absolutely.
every
That's my
single
life.
day.
It is.
It's going to happen.
But that's all right. We'll have to, the issue is how we're going to deal with it. We're going to deal with it. When we get kids back, these are not reasons for us not to start looking at
Right.
when it's time to bring kids back. These are the things that we will handle when they come back. Okay?
At our best, we'll model that Disney experience, because when you talk about reminding people to use hand sanitizer, that has become very common almost everywhere now. You watch kids and adults do it, but the reminder to wash your hands, that's not new. Having been in elementary school, I know Dr. King and I can tell you, that is, that we're used to that conversation around we need to wash our hands, if we've done so and otherwise. And so I think it's important that, we think of that, hey, princess, we're going to remind you in the same way. When it comes to Meals on the Bus, I do want to talk about the child nutrition services on our Return to Learn information portal. And I cannot emphasize that enough, not just for this group, but for the general public. When we share those updates weekly on Thursdays right now that are district level, we are working very hard to provide comprehensive information across several areas: instruction, auxiliary services, community services, support services. But one of the most recent ones that was published this last Thursday was this idea of how we're going to continue to provide food service to our community. So we've got 15 grab and go locations. Those schools are listed on the left-hand column of that chart on the school system webpage. Again, parents and families will have the ability between those hours that are posted to go by those school sites. Our community feeding guidelines continue through the end of this month, which is why, again, it's critical that we hope that we get permission to extend that after August the 31st. We also are going to have Meals on the Bus routes that are going to model the same scope and service that we had during the school closure period. We know that there were areas and communities and individuals in our school system that were not able to get to a grab and go site. And so we learned about those areas. Our school counselors and our support staff and our child nutrition staff help us target those areas. And so we've got 8 bus routes that are going to be running, and we expect that they will continue to be able to run so that we can continue to serve those areas across our community. And what maybe we're most grateful for in that particular way is we've got a number of community partners who are trying to provide care service during this period of time. And we've been utilizing those areas as targeted Meals on the Bus route areas. We know, for example, if the Boys and Girls Club is going to be caring for our children as they have been doing, we're going to go to them and make sure that they have food services for our children in the community. So there's been tremendous effort as it relates to coordinating with our community partners and where those services are so that we can make sure that meal service continues during this period.
I have a couple questions on that.
Yes, sir.
So Boys and Girls Club, I think they're eligible to have, say, 200 kids or so. We're going to be able to bring 200 meals for breakfast and lunch to
Right.
those folks as I think the YMCA, the Kellogg Center,
That's right.
Camp Toccoa. I think one thing that might be helpful to a lot of parents, and it's kind of backtracking a little bit, I know there's been a lot of talk about different churches that might be opening up and might be able to help kids virtually and things of that nature with childcare. I don't think it would hurt if we could put that on our webpage somewhere.
I'm so glad you said that. It's on our webpage. The very last bullet of that return to learn that I was
Last
speaking.
bullet is?
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
If you click on that community services, it is a listing of childcare providers, their contact information, the registration information, the cost information, specifically those who have made it known to us that we can publish it.
Yeah.
Not every group is willing to have us publish that information yet, because some groups are specific to membership or to their congregations,
Sure.
and they're maybe publishing that information internally. But what we've been doing is updating that list regularly. So when a community partner, Mr. Craven, says, hey, you can list us on here because we're providing childcare services during this Plan C, then we're taking all that information and including it. And we're going to continue to update that because, as Mr. Caldwell said, we know as we move toward a fully face-to-face environment, we hope we get to Plan A as soon as possible. But as we move toward that, childcare is not going to be just an August 17th issue, right? Childcare is going to be a concern for parents and families in August and September and October and moving forward. So we hope to really grow that list of people in our community that are offering that.
I think Molly's on vacation, but if we could get that to the media and
Yes,
get
sir.
that out so folks can see that, and
We have the
Get
ability
those
to push that
lists out
directly
there.
to the media. We'll do so.
Perfect.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
SROs and school nurses, they're not in service right now, are they in the
Yeah, they are.
schools?
A little bit of both. Our school resource officers actually began today. They're all back in the schools across all of our 23 school sites. So they are working. They're a group of people that I think missed being in schools as much as we did. They have such tremendous connections with our children, especially our children who you might consider to be at risk or really in need of that positive role model. And so our SROs are back in all of our school buildings today. We cannot thank our sheriff's office and our police department for providing that service. Our school nurses, who have been great partners during this period of time, have been part of the group that was leveraged, as you heard Mr. Smith say, for contact tracing. They're continuing that work. There's a group of them that are rotating through the schools right now. So they are working on providing trainings to staff, helping to coordinate any of the needs that are associated with what's taking place in the schools. And we have been assured that they'll be back in a full-time capacity when students return, and in a more full-time capacity, like a Plan B and beyond. But given that right now it's predominantly just staff in the building, the nurses are helping to do that support right now.
Are parents going to be allowed into the 6th grade and the 9th grade orientations, or just the elementary?
Yes, ma'am. The parents would be allowed in that. Some of them have been scheduled as that, and they'd have to go through our screening protocols. They'd have to follow the expectations that are true on school campuses. But some of those orientations, as Dr. King was mentioning, it's going to be as important to train the parents as it's going to be to train the students in terms of, device application, connecting with their teachers and otherwise.
And say an elementary kid shows up, are we going to ask them those 4 questions?
The screener questions are simply posted. We just direct everybody's attention to them. We don't make you answer every question individually. We've provided them as notifications. They're screener questions that say, all right, before you enter this building, you just need to make sure that you don't answer yes to any of these. But we're not reading the questions and requesting that you apply. Great questions. Absolutely.
The last thing I would like to mention about reentry is the transition from C to B. And this whole, you made a statement earlier, something about doctors and where the percentage is and hospital beds and some other things. Well, thinking on the same lines, I have talked to Steve Smith, and I've got a think tank going on with 3 area doctors, one from Pardee Hospital, a doctor from Advent Health, and a doctor from Blue Ridge Health. And working with those 3 doctors and with Steve Smith, I would like to report to you in 2 weeks on what they would feel comfortable in Henderson County of what it looks like. And we're going through every different factor possible, number of beds, that kind of thing. Where are we? What percentage are we? We're on a downhill slide right now, which is good for us. What number percentage would those 3 doctors representing those 3 hospitals feel good about? Because this is a health issue. And so I just felt like it was good for me to reach out into our community, which we have a tremendous community with great medical resources with us. And like I said, We got a representation from each of the what I call the big three, and we're going to start working. And in fact, right now they're working individually, and we're going to have our very first meeting at the first of next week with myself and the group to start coming up with some parameters that I could bring to you as a recommendation on this is what these doctors are looking at. The issue about testing is it's hard to say if we make it, let's just say we need 7% or we need it at 5%. Well, the problem is we may be at 5%, then it jumps to 7%. Well, are we going to jump back and forth or are we going to basically, here's what they want to look at it because they know that information much better than I know the information. And we're going to come up with a recommendation to present to you in a couple of weeks on where Henderson County, we feel like we need to be to safely bring these students back. And so therefore it might be sooner than 6 weeks that we looked at. It might be later, depending on what's happening within the next 2 weeks. But therefore, I just want to let you know, after your comments, that I was already kind of thinking ahead. Great minds think alike. So thank you for that. To go ahead and get these doctors together, and they're already working on us. And so I'll present to you. And I would like to basically call a budget workshop, if Mr. Craven is all right, in say 2 weeks to continue to talk about it. Number one, we can talk about very shortly the reopening, and number two, I can bring you up to date where we are in the think tank. A very short meeting, but kind of tell you where we are in the community and what we're looking for. Because I certainly want to give parents notice. I don't want to announce on Friday that on Monday we're going to make a transition and we're going to go to B.
Right.
There needs to be time for this transition. So therefore, I'm trying to think ahead. So therefore, I will certainly work out with Mr. Craven and we'll.
We've got a date and time for you already.
Yeah, we already
Okay,
did
you
it.
got a date and time for, say another one, great minds think alike. So
Right.
therefore, we're good to
I
go.
guess we should check to see if you're available.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I'm gonna
Go
think
ahead.
about
I'm
that.
available to 12/1/2020.
Can I ask Jan one more question?
Sure.
Jan, where's the state testing that they were all so big about for the elementary?
So there's a couple of pieces to that, and state testing in general is still on, if you will. There's not been a waiver. There's a lot of interest in potentially a waiver to accountability. The third grade, beginning of grade test must be given, but not until a window when students are back face to face. There is one test that does still have to be given the first 10 days of school, and it can be given remotely, and that's a fourth grade assessment. We'll be using the iReady reading diagnostic. It can and will be given remotely. Our students who can't take it remotely will bring in by appointment to take it. That's all tied to the read to. You might hear a lot about some optional assessments. Right now, I think in our district that the way we do not want to welcome students back.
Hey, take a test. Hey.
We talk about building community, building culture, even if it's an online culture. While we do need to know where students are and what they're able to do in an informative way. So we'll do what we are compelled to do, statutory requirements, but other than that, a lot of formative assessment that is not so high.
I'm assuming
wanna
if
say
they
something.
do, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was saying if they do give you the option for a waiver, you probably will apply for them.
Yeah, it's our understanding that U.S. Department of Education right now is not accepting any state waivers. And it would be a situation where the state would end up applying to the U.S. Department.
I want to say, I think it's probably safe for everybody. The teachers, the secretaries, the principals, the custodians, everybody, they're going to make this work because they love our kids, and you guys certainly have. But, just a shout out for the teachers, they're going to have those kids in their classroom with them remotely and hopefully soon in person. But, I think we just owe so much to all our staff and everybody of everything that's being done. And I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that comment. After your last board meeting, after the meeting where you decided immediately we saw teachers who were not employed this summer in their contract signing up for virtual instruction to refine their practice. Hundreds of teachers signing up to work on courses prior to this first day back at work to refine their practices. So I know they'll appreciate that shout out.
somebody had commented on that. I don't remember where I saw it, but it was like, they were taking they weren't paid. They were just taking all these courses, and just because they love their students and they want to make it the best possible experience for them. So, I mean, that's big.
Mr. Fender's facilitating online courses. And then all instructional staff will take a required back to school training by the end of this week, virtual, to refine their remote learning practices.
A comment about the fourth grade. I've never been be all end all this testing, but I'm glad to hear that there is going to be something for reading, because if you were a third grader last year and reading was a challenge, you had no spring where you got the help you might have gotten. And we cannot afford to let those children where reading was a problem to go on. So even though it's another test, I'm very glad that there's going to be some way to evaluate those kids and what do they need before they take off again into the fourth grade.
Absolutely. And a little later in your, we're going to talk about those K3, well, not just fourth grade.
Dan, how'd the Jump Start program do? Did they have most of the kids showing up or what?
Yeah, Jumpstart went really well. Kudos to those teachers who worked with those students. But got positive feedback.
So are you going to tell us about staff? Do you plan on going through that? Like who is affected by this? Like, in other words, bus drivers, what pay do we have for them? Can we go through that just so we know?
We can.
I didn't want to wait on the click and not have the click.
No, and I purposely, I had that and I marked it out. And because the reason is we just got, we would have told you one thing 2 days ago, and now all of a sudden we got information. So it's awful hard for me to say right now. I would prefer to maybe give you an update a little later.
Okay.
Just due to the fact that we thought we could not employ a group because that funding was not available to use to pay for that group. And now we just got permission to use that funding to pay for another group. So therefore, I don't want to all of a sudden start sending panic out through our staff. I think that through the work of Mr. Rhodes, we will get that information to you, but we're constantly trying to do the best we can to make sure that, number one, that people are employed. However, that what they're doing is work. We can't pay people to stay home. That funding is gone, okay? But if we're going to pay people, they're going to come to work and they're going to do a job. But yet I've got to see if I can use this bucket of money to pay this person who worked out of here but is not doing that job. So I'm still working on that.
Okay.
If you don't mind, just give me a little time, because I'm afraid if I had a list and sent that out and the next thing you know is emails, I need a job, and now 2 days later it could get changed, when everything is just like, it's just truly amazing how things just absolutely, it's always evolving and is always changing, because like I said, we would have reported something to you last week that's different this week.
Right.
So if you don't mind,
Yeah,
Ms. Holt,
I totally
we'll
get
get
it.
that information to you. Is it okay? Is everyone good with reentry? And should I go to
Yeah, let's
equity?
go ahead to equity.
Equity for all. Let me kind of report to you on where we are with that. Last time I met with you, I said I met with basically a group of employees. It was not the best week. I guess I should not have picked the week of the 4th of July to have that group meet. And we also, to be honest with you, have some non-certified staff members that I'm not sure they even checked their email. So I want to do a better job. I want to bring that committee back together and hopefully have a larger number to go back and ask some of those same questions, because like we said, our first step is listening. Also, I would like for Dr. King to kind of bring you up on some staff development that has already occurred for our staff. And Dr. King, talk about teachers and administrators on where we are.
Sure. Sorry. We had our administrator back to school. We sometimes call it a retreat, but retreat is a code name in education for a long day of meetings. It wasn't really a retreat. It was a long virtual meeting. We had updates from our attorney's office. But later that afternoon, we reserved a section of the day to hear from Nikita McCall, who is with Edu Consulting, and helping us take a reflective look at ourselves, at our own stance as educators and as leaders when it comes to the conversation around equity for all of our students. And she asked us some reflective questions and took us through some exercises in a brief session, one of those that just starts that conversation with our administrators. Also, I have to give a shout out to those teachers. Ms. Case was mentioning, we asked a lot of our teachers to help us develop the back to school PD, professional development happening this week. And we asked them to look in their content areas as part of that. So while we're working on prioritizing the standards and how do we make remote learning work, to also look at where do we have issues of bias just in what we teach. And I'm going to give you an example. I don't think Ms. Gash would mind me sharing this, but in Katie Gash's PD for middle school math, she asked teachers across our district, look at your word problems. Look at the names that are used in your word problems. Do those names always reflect names like John and Susie and Linda? Or we're a district with 24% of our students who are Hispanic. So sometimes are those names, a Hispanic name? And so very simple things that are just part of changing our instructional practice. And ELA classroom teachers asked to look at, okay, look at what you assign to be read, whether it's a text, a novel, an article. Do the authors of the text that you assign reflect our student population? So we are starting to take some intentional instructional steps. When I look at how does long-term change happen, it doesn't usually happen by being mandated, especially when you're talking about a change of head and heart.
Yep.
And so we're trying to take some very deliberate instructional practice steps as well to be purposeful in the work that we're doing around the national conversation around equity.
And we've made a commitment. This is not just a one-time shot. You're right. This is just not a pill you can take and all of a sudden just this one staff development and everything's going to go away. It's going to be continued work. I think that was the challenge given to all of us about this board, is continued work throughout the year with the focus groups, with me even, like I said, talking to student focus groups on what we need to do, continued with our administrators, bringing in additional speakers either through this organization, or I have now got in touch with another organization that's doing a lot of work throughout North Carolina school systems in the same way. We're going to bring that group in, talk to them, see what they can do, have them present to our principals as well. We are working on a plan to basically interweave on what we're already doing. We don't want to make this an extra. We don't want to just all of a sudden put something else on this plate here that you can just push aside. We want to interweave it and embed it in what we're already doing. So therefore, that's kind of a short synopsis on what we're doing, but truly I think we made a great step in just this last couple of weeks. To let you know, I think if he's still there, Mr. Rhodes has already set up a virtual recruiting trip with Winston-Salem State. I think it was canceled for COVID for this spring. So now I think they're starting to do them back. So this spring we're going to do that. And we're also continuing to publish in the National Minority Magazine for basically positions and jobs. We take out an ad wanting them to come to work for Henderson County Public Schools. So just to kind of continue an update on where we are, we're continuing to push forward on that.
Awesome. I thank you guys, and I did challenge you guys to look outside of the box. And one thing you said is it doesn't stop today. It didn't stop yesterday. It's a continual thing that happens over time. And I think one of the most important pieces, I know you try to get in touch with some people in July, is really once the school year starts, because we're going to see the haves and have-nots, and we're going to see those gaps the longer that this stance that we're in, as far as virtual school versus not being in school, you're going to see those widen. And we have to be purposeful and intentful to make sure that we are going to those groups that potentially have the ability to lessen their educational status and just make sure we're really intentional with what we're doing and reaching those folks. So
Can I
please
ask
keep it
a
up.
question? I remember at one point it was thrown out like evening tutoring sessions or Saturdays, like you were thinking there might be a pot of money we could draw from to do that. Have you explored that any further?
We do think that's because during Plan C, we have those afternoons available because we didn't want to put kids in screen time for that long. we haven't set anything up except for afternoons. But when we move to Plan B, where the students who are coming in person are there 8 to 3, essentially, students who are joining remotely are joining 8 to 3, essentially, we know that we have parents who are already signing their students up for a full semester of virtual. They've already committed to that.
Right.
In our district, that was about 350 students last time I checked today who have signed up for a semester of virtual. After our teachers have taught all day, we will use some extra employment so that the families, especially if they've signed up, no matter why they signed up, but if they signed up for medical reasons and they need that one-on-one so that they could come in the evening, come on the weekends, and we will definitely pursue that, especially with option B.
Yeah, I worried about a parent works 8 to 5 and they just can't get their kids here, but they need that extra, face-to-face tutoring.
Absolutely.
Those were the people I was worried about.
All right, next is going to be enrollment update. Scott Rhodes. Boy, that face mask though.
Those of you at home can't see, that's a New York Yankee face mask. 27 World Series. Okay, sorry enough of that. I want to give you an opportunity to hear a little bit about where we're at from an enrollment standpoint. And just kind of to remind you, I know we go over this once a year, so it's easy to forget kind of how this works. But our enrollment, we get a projected enrollment from the state, and they give us they predict the number of students that we should have going into the school year. And I want to tell you that number is 13,463 students. Okay, so that's the projected enrollment from DPI. Currently, we're sitting at 13,218 students. Now, our goal is always to be inside 100 students of the projection. So if it's 13,463, we want to be at 13,364. So as long as we're in with 100 students of that projected number, then we don't have a reduction in funding. Okay. So right now, as you'll see, right now we're 146 students outside of that 100 student window. Okay. So just kind of give you a little bit of a brief history of kind of what does it look like now compared to what does it look like in the past. I started thinking about, as a board member, some of the questions you may ask, like where are we at right now with our kindergarten numbers? So I want to report to you that at this exact same time last year, we were sitting at 900 kindergartners that were enrolled. Right now we're at 881. We ended up the year at 950 kindergartnens. So there's still time for folks to enroll. So we'll wait to see what happens. Obviously, as it's been stated in this boardroom many times, nothing is as usual, as nothing's normal. Everything's different this year. So we don't know exactly what to expect. But we are keeping up with those numbers daily. Now, as we get ready to look at again, we still are responsible for meeting our K3 class size. I'm happy to report that we are within those numbers. And one of the things that I also would want you to know is that Mr. Socia and I, when we get together with Kelda Livingston, the three of us really sit down at the beginning of the year in the spring as we get ready to have allotment meetings. And even though the state has given us a number of 13,463, when we start allotting positions out to our schools, we don't allot on that number. We take the number of students that we have in the spring, we roll those students up, and we use the same number of kindergartners from the year past to use as a predictor of what we're going to use as far as handing out positions. That has paid off for us in the past because that number is going to be much lower than what the 13,463. So I don't know what the end result will be. Obviously, we'll be reporting that to you as we get closer to that 20-day number. But we're hopeful that we still feel like we're the best gig in town, and we hope everyone decides to start on a virtual format with us as we look forward to getting into Plan B.
Does that 13,218 count the students that have said they're going to go to homeschool or they're going to go to private school or whatever?
So the 13,218 are just right now what's enrolled in Power School. And we've had some folks who have come in and unenrolled, and so those numbers have reflected when they've left, but these numbers are just as of today. So if anyone came in today and said, you know what, I'm going to choose a different option, then that number may be lower. But again, we may have some who have enrolled. That's why when we get this close, we start checking it every day. Because again, we have some schools that are right there on the edge of whether we need to add a teacher. We've actually saved a few positions where we've had some enrollment where the kindergarten maybe or at a different grade level may look a little bit lower. So we feel, I think, very confident, Mr. Socia and I, that our position allotments, we're in good shape right now.
Is this our last year of the relaxed K through 3 numbers?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Right now, we are an individual classroom in K3 can have 21 students in the classroom, but the district average has to be 18.
Right, okay.
Got to remember, we also have to account for those virtually. So therefore, if they're virtual and they're with Mrs. Smith's class and Mrs. Smith has some in class plus virtual, you still can't go over that limit at this time.
Okay.
Once again, we're asking for the General Assembly to give us some relaxation on that. So therefore, because you could have a lot more virtual students at home in that K through 3, but right now they're basically saying no. It's the K through 3 is the class size it is.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Jan King, K through 3 Literacy Diagnostic.
Ms. Korn set me up for this really well by talking about our elementary students learning to read. So I'm going to give you a little quick history lesson. In the state of North Carolina, we've been doing, after the Read to Achieve legislation passed, we've been doing diagnostic assessment with our kindergartners up through our 3rd graders, and then with some 4th graders and 5th graders as their reading skills have shown that they needed support. When we talked about that 4th grade assessment coming in, it's because those 3rd graders were not able to take their end of grade test. So the goal in North Carolina is that all students are reading and reading on grade level by 3rd grade. We have always used, because the state pays for it and mandates it, the diagnostic assessment that the state hands out. So I want you to imagine you're a K3 teacher for a minute. 2 years ago, they were using a product by Amplify called M-Class, because that's what the state adopted. And they had been trained on that. This past year, they were using a product that the state adopted, different product, called iStation. State paid for it, adopted it.
And they adopted that illegally. Let me go ahead and point that out.
And as
Mark Johnson did that.
As Ms. Holt has pointed out, it has been controversial and there have been legal proceedings because of that. What has happened this year is that the State Board of Education approved 5 vendors and have given us an allotment of money, and we get to choose one of the 5 approved vendors. On that 5 vendor list, thank goodness, were some that we were already familiar with. M-Class, that our teachers were familiar with, iStation, that our teachers were familiar with, and iReady, which our teachers were familiar with from math. And then 2 others that we had not used, which is the NWEA Measures of Academic Progress, or MAP assessments, and the other one was Renaissance Learning, the STAR assessment. I'll give a lot of credit to Ms. Marlowe, our elementary ed director. She kind of saw this coming. She put a committee together. All 13 of our elementary schools had an administrator representative and a K3 teacher representative who were voting members of this little task force to look at the 5 options. I sat in on that meeting, and very quickly that group of folks, after they understood our task before us, took the 2 that we have not trained teachers on off the table, because they knew that coming back to school this year in this environment, the last thing we had time for was to train on a new platform. And they focused on the 3 that our teachers have had experience with and weighed out the pros and cons of those. And at the end of that, took a vote. Our teachers have voted to go with the iReady reading diagnostic assessment.
Yay.
So we will get some
We've had
funds.
some schools on that already, haven't we?
We have. We've had some schools that purchase it, like with their Title I funds. It will not purchase the full suite of iReady, but it will purchase those diagnostic assessments. And so that means no additional training for our teachers except for new hires. And from a parent perspective, and this weighed in heavily to that committee, from a parent perspective, they liked the idea of a parent seeing identical reports in math and reading because the reporting looks very similar.
But the games, you won't be able to play the games like the math on iReady like you do for for the reading.
Yeah, the
Cost for that, do you know offhand?
some schools have purchased it even with their Jump Start funds this summer. And it's all based on how many students are enrolled at your school. It varies based on school size. But the diagnostic assessment really is just kind of leveling you where you are. But what we love about it, what our teachers love about it, is that it then tells you next steps. So if these are the skills the student has, and these are the skills where they still need to grow, here are the next pieces to work on,
Nice.
which is really nice. And it can be administered remotely, which is also,
Will you find out for us what the additional cost would be to get the full suite?
I will. I can tell you that over half of our schools have already bought the full suite.
With their
So-
Title I funds, but they don't all, okay.
Okay, but they'll have to do it again next year, right? It's an enrollment type thing?
It is. It's an annual cost.
Okay,
And
because what I'm thinking is if we're only looking at, not only, but if we're looking at X amount of money for this year, we really need to plan for if half the schools are going to double it, because we can't look at some schools and say,
Well, we're gonna have a new superintendent next year.
well, that's true.
And so
Priorities.
He may
they,
not want
they
to.
might change it. They are going to change it again. It's always
and I
changing.
hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the way federal funding works and Title I funding works, we couldn't let Title I buy something and then local buy some. If we're going to buy something
It's for
for,
everyone.
like Title I has to be supplemental on top of
Right.
things. So if we bought it locally, we'd have to buy it for all.
So could
Yeah.
could
Unless
we
we do it.
only look at that for next year, or could we reimburse those schools?
And let them spend it on something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, so half the kids are gonna be able to use the full suite and half aren't.
That is true, but it's true based on the fact that the schools that get the most, so the way Title I works, it's to help level the playing
Sure.
field based on poverty levels and student ADM.
But isn't Hendersonville Elementary a Title I?
They are a K2 targeted Title I, which means they don't hit that 40% threshold to be a school-wide Title I. And so we just focus on K2 literacy there.
Okay.
Yeah. In general, for K3 reading assessment, I think we're all motivated by choice. And after being told which program to use
Yeah.
for a while, I sensed a real win for our teachers that they
Mhm.
had a choice
Right.
in what the diagnostic would
It's a
be.
1-year win.
Oh, yeah.
And I hope our parents like it because it will be the same reporting.
No, having one program is a lot easier than having separate programs that you have to go between for different.
And the reporting for I'm ready for the math, I love it. I think it's great.
All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Let's move on to construction update, Dr. John Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Craven and members of the board. This will be a short, quick update, but I just want to kind of praise how, again, strong the coordination, the communication has been among the companies that have been working with us most recently, specifically Hendersonville High School, Flat Rock Middle School, and Rugby Middle School. We have stayed and continue to stay on a very aggressive timeline while our students are not in session. But because we're planning to now deliver live instruction, what I want to really just highlight for you is everybody recognizes that changes their work time and responsibilities. Use Hendersonville High School as an example. If you saw the brickwork that's being done outside that we talked about, the tuck pointing and replacing the mortar and otherwise, that's not work that can be sought out between 8 and 3 o'clock because we're providing instruction to students during that period of time. And so those schedules has been flexed. The work that's going on at Rugby and Flat Rock to continue to update those HVAC systems, if you were to go out there, you would see some areas where you can still see the construction is going on, but it's not going to be disrupting the learning that's taking place during that live instructional period. They'll be working in the evenings, they'll be working on weekends to continue to accelerate that timetable. I am proud to report that, we've long been concerned about our inability to properly monitor the temperature in those spaces, but in the places where it has been done, I have only heard rave reviews of the ability to now have a moderate temperature and appropriate humidity in that space from those split units. Ms. Holt is more versed in this than I am, but when it comes down to that particular work and the construction efforts, really a credit to David Berry and John Mitchell, who are the leads for the county and the exceptional work that they do, but their responsiveness to us saying, okay, things change now. We have been during this summer period not open, if you will, but live learning starts on Monday. and our staff are back in those buildings. And so working in concert with us during this period of time is critical. So we're really proud that everybody has been very responsive to that, who have continued to say, you just tell us what you need as you move toward more face-to-face environments, and we'll continue to plan accordingly. So proud to report that continuing. We do love the rain, but I will say, if you're on a live construction site, every afternoon when it downpours in this tropical rainforest, that they're dealing with that as an issue. But again, we'll take the blessings that are among us. So we don't want to complain about the rain. Mr. Caldwell reminds me, if we complain about the rain, then we'd be dealing with dust and not mud. So we keep that in mind as we work through it. And so everybody's working well on that front. We're going to continue to stay aggressive on that front and look forward to, in the very near future, perhaps taking you on a tour of the work that's been done, because there's been a lot of exciting progress on both those sites.
About how far ahead are we at Hendersonville High?
It's really hard to predict. I would not tie it to a particular time. What I say is that every place that we've been able to jump ahead by upscheduling the work, we've done so. David Berry and Vinoy Construction have worked really, really well to advance those schedules. But again, as I'm reminded, ahead is relative. Things like it raining every day change the schedules for work that's being done outside, while we might be getting ahead in other places. So really what we're trying to do is make sure that we continue to create an environment that allows us to stay on schedule and not get behind schedule, and be prepared to work with kids as soon as they're back in those buildings.
Dr. Bryant, has
Yes, sir.
all the work at Edneyville Elementary on the outside, parking and play areas, has all that been completed?
Yes, sir. Right now, they're doing a lot of what we call kind of the punch list sort of things. As soon as everything is officially done, you now recognize they're having to clean up some little areas. Like we've got some areas where we're wanting to make sure that the stormwater properly drains, especially from the lower areas and into the play areas. They're going through all the different classrooms and making sure all those areas are punched. But if you were to drive into the facility, for the most part, the only thing that you might visibly be able to see is that there was a temporary sidewalk that ran in front of the school, that the weather keeps delaying our ability to get that cleaned up because it's kind of a mess. But the paving area, the curb and gutter, the new entryways, the main entranceway, all of what we would consider to be the major milestones are completed.
Do you have or could you tell me a percentage complete for Flat Rock and Rugby and the?
I will follow up with you guys on a percentage complete, but I hate to shoot from the hip on that. Yes, ma'am. But I will. I'll follow up with you on that.
So on the Hendersonville work, since now they won't be able to do some of it during the day, will that mean that we'll be doing a lot more work at night?
No, they'll do the work that isn't disruptive to live learning. So you would see people out on the scaffolding replacing the mortar, because that's quiet, but you won't see any saw cutting during that period of time. You might hear and see the saw cutting after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You might see that work early in the morning. They had some conversation about coming in well before any instruction starts and doing that kind of work. But if you can kind of think about our instructional day during that period of time, they'd be doing work at least along the Stillwell side that isn't disruptive. The work that's going on the Boyd area, where you see the grading for the parking lot and the new gym and the gym renovations taking place, that work will continue as you see it right now.
And most of the paving projects, they're pretty much the repaving?
Yes, sir. Yeah, those have been progressing along. If you were to ride onto some of our campuses, you'll see fresh asphalt in a lot of places. And so we've really taken advantage of, again, the ability to tackle those projects. So.
How much time is left remaining on the tuck pointing? I know that's a scaffolding on the HHS.
I'll have to get back to you on that. I wouldn't want to shoot from the hip on that one, but I'll let you know.
Was it this January that we were supposed to be able to get into the new side of the campus on Hendersonville High? Was it the cafeteria? Was that this January?
We essentially would ideally be accessing what you might consider to be new as of like June and July of 2021. So when you think, we essentially gave that property away for the gym work to take place for a solid year, essentially June to June. So our goal is that we would have access to that side of the facility starting in 2021, the summer of 2021.
Yeah, it was August 2021 to be able to have the gyms available.
Okay.
But the cafeteria, correct me if I'm wrong, was
a whole nother,
the
following
January.
January
Yes.
2022.
2022.
And that's when we would transition, moving kids from Stillwell into there,
And then
reflexing
the
building,
Yeah.
and then jumping
Well,
into
I can
sewer.
tell you, I'm super happy, I guess, if there is a blessing, that this pandemic has happened and the kids are not participating in sports at the time. I mean, could you imagine if this pandemic was next year and they lost the gym this part of the year and then
Well, I didn't
lose
think about that.
sports again? So, I mean, I guess that kind of lined up a little.
No, if there is one good thing for the school system that's happened is it's that work and the other work at Flat Rock and Rugby has been able to, I mean, full steam ahead. And I don't know if you've driven by there lately, but there's lots of things going up right there. So it's awesome.
Yes, sir.
Have we pushed, because I know we talked about it before the budget was approved down at the county, but did we are we stalling the rugby redo in the front?
Yes, ma'am. The
That's-
renovation for Rugby's entrance and the renovation for Upward Elementary's
Upward, that's
were the
right,
projects that
those
were
two.
put on hold.
Okay, okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bernie Socha's on the hot seat, financial statements. Welcome. Yeah.
Yeah. First thing we have is the local current expense and other restricted for June 30th. We came in pretty good this year. Revenue is at $30,900,000 with expenditures at $30,470,000. So we ended up on the good side of zero on that one when we kind of anticipated that we were going to be going the other direction. Revenue came in pretty much as expected. The big difference we had was our fines and forfeitures. Other than that, our revenues were consistent and we just had a little bit less on the expenditure side. So we were happy with that. The beginning of the year for current expense this year, everything is as much as normal as we can expect at this point, not knowing where we're headed, but just showing that we have $2,900,000 of revenues and just, $2,928,000 and $1,076,000 of expenditures. If you compare to last year, it seems like we kind of go back and forth on this one each year. The difference being our insurance premium bill is when we get it. We get it in July or August. This year we got it. We did not have it in July. Last year we did have it in July. So that's why there's a difference in expenditures. Other than that, our lines are pretty much consistent with where they were last year at this point. There's not a whole lot going on in the summer months yet. Any question on the local side of things?
So
All you. Amy.
that's not local, but I'll wait. Go ahead. My question is childcare.
Be there momentarily.
Okay.
Capital outlay, you may be thinking, where is all that money? Reporting revenues of $29,051,000 as opposed to expenditures of $28,861,000. That's us recording Edneyville on our books. We didn't actually get the money, but we're from accounting, we have to record the value of that on our books. Same thing, the other big chunk in there is actually school buses. We didn't pay for the school buses, the state did, but we have to record them on our books.
And that's the Windsor Autry.
That's the 6,500 line.
Gotcha.
Oh, I'm sorry. On the revenue side, yes. That's where
side.
that's donations. Yeah, it's
weird.
typically just been the Windsor Autry money, which is sales of homes over in that neighborhood. But that's also the donation line. So we record that as a donation from the county.
We have to put that in that code that way in 4,400.
Yeah.
That's so awkward.
Yes, sir.
I mean, it doesn't make sense to put it there, but whatever.
ABC sales are up. That we should be getting more money for that. That's a positive I read.
It's looking good to start the year off. We pretty much are about 50%
That's
of
a
our
plus for the
annual revenues
pandemic.
already.
Taking us from the fines and forfeits.
Fine for forfeitures.
Yeah,
one
that's
way.
going to be a big loss.
Eventually, it'll all come back around for fines. Forfeitures.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. People drinking too much and driving.
Okay,
Attorneys want that money.
over to your enterprise funds. Child nutrition, this is back to as of June 30th. We had the revenues of 6.1 million and expenditures at 6.6. I was speaking with Mr. Rolfe today. There's still over $200,000 of receivables that we expect to be getting, which will take that deficit down to 248, which he was actually happy with because he was thinking it was going to be about 350. So, and it's a deficit in that part of that was him buying equipment this year out of program savings from prior years because they have a large fund balance. He's buying equipment. So he was anticipating between that and with everything that was going on that he was going to be further into the red than he is.
Well, you put 51,000 into the fund from fund balance. So what's left from his fund balance?
Well, that's actually the fund transfer portion of that line, which is how much we are contributing from our state funds into pay for part of his salary. That's a requirement that we have every year. We have to
Okay.
pay state funds.
So what is the fund balance?
Oh, they have $2 million.
And then do we anticipate any more federal dollars coming in on line 3,800 based on,
There's $200,000 that we still anticipate to get,
or that's it? That's the only receivable
and
we
that's
have?
all that we expect to get. Yep.
Okay.
Child care, and I apologize, I sent the wrong version of this. Things on the report that I used were out of line. So if you're comparing this year to last year and you're wondering why they don't line up from the dollars, it's because they were shifted on this version. But the total dollars are the same. Year-to-date activity, revenue is $1,094,000, expenditures at $1,159,000. With a small receivable yet to come in there. I think about $4,000. And this number will take us back to almost the same place we were in March. That was the program deficit at March when we closed for COVID, and all of the funding that we received were to hold for our enterprise funds without losing money during the school closure. So where we were at that point, we used COVID funds to keep them whole in that March through June time period.
Remind me again what their fund balance is.
There's 180,000 is what sticks in my head right now. Because we figured we had a couple years worth of operating at this previous year's deficit, and then they're going to be out.
180 grand left in fund balance, and we know we have a serious child care situation coming up, and we've got 160 kids that we can put into our child care centers by law right now. And if we don't charge for that for our employees, how are we going to make up the difference, and how are we going to have any money in that fund balance at all come next year?
That is an excellent question. We would be either utilizing the fund balance that they have available until we depleted it, or we would have to utilize local fund balance if you were so to direct us in that manner.
All right.
So we were able to use state funds to pay for the child care for first responders in the spring, correct?
Right.
And then will we be able to use those? You may not even know, will we be able to use those funds? Because we are going to open it up possibly to first responders.
We don't know of any of those funds coming in moving forward. Not to say that they might not, but we're not planning on getting any of that.
Okay.
I'd like to make sure that you send us a report on this one,
Mhm.
Child Care Monthly. I want to see exactly where we're at.
Yeah, because we're
Every
going to have
single
to make
month.
some tough, and I know we were going in the direction of looking at what we were going to do, and then the
It
bottom,
changed everything.
right, the bottom
Exactly.
fell out. So
You know.
there's nothing we're going to be able to do right at this moment
Right.
anyway.
And we've not lost focus of that. I think
Right.
right now is we had to change focus.
Right.
And your question, we've talked about, the child care. And to be honest with you, it was their fund balance that we were going to have to
For your
use
future.
and to look at that. So that's where we are right now. And then, like I say, I think it seems like that number seems correct because it seemed like we had like 3 years of what they're
Based
basically
on
been
last
going.
year.
Right. So
So, we've got some extra money that's set aside. I want to make sure that we don't lose focus of this. You guys know, and I've been on this for the past couple of years, to make sure that we're never revenue neutral on this. And clearly that's not going to happen this year. Hopefully some state funds can come, maybe some federal funds that can help supplement it, but you can't count on it.
At this point, we don't have any of the COVID money that would apply to childcare.
We've spent it.
None of those COVID funds
It's already
apply to
done. Okay.
this.
And so hopefully there's some state and some federal funds that are going to come down the pipeline sooner rather than later. But if not, I want a monthly report on exactly where we stand, especially since they're going to be watching the kids longer. Well, maybe.
Right.
We don't know. Yeah, so just make sure you keep us abreast of that, please.
Well, and I mean, even if we're opening it up to first responders at a reduced rate, when you look at some, like I'm not calling out the why they're doing a great service, but $200 a week as opposed to $50 a week, or something that at least pays for that child's spot, I mean, would be better than nothing, because we're losing money.
Good deal?
Hey, on this child nutrition, didn't we just have a discussion about changing our prices?
We did.
And what was the purpose of that?
We had
Make
changed the
money or
price.
lose less? Or break even?
Well, I
Well,
think always in your enterprise, in my personal opinion, in an enterprise fund, a fund that you don't actually have to provide, you should be looking to break even at worst. You're not looking to make money off of a $2.15 school lunch, but you certainly don't want to lose money on it. So the reason that we did that is we had not raised prices in, I think it was 5, 6, 7 years, something like that.
right.
And we raised it only for lunch. We didn't raise breakfast, if I remember correctly.
Right.
And so that's why we raised those funds. I think a lot of what you're seeing here is we fed a lot of kids, 7,000 plus meals a day. We had all of our folks working. We have 15 sites open, trying to make sure that we're getting those meals out. Clearly, these numbers are going to be skewed because of COVID.
You're saying if we had COVID, we'd be breaking even?
We
Bernie?
normally don't lose a whole lot of
Not
money
in this
there.
year, no.
Not in this year.
We were already spending more than the revenue for the year before COVID happened.
And that's
Part
why
of
we
that was
raised
by
prices.
design. Part of it was
Right.
just, again, we haven't changed the prices in a very long time, so we were slowly going in that direction.
And then we're federally required to change the cash prices to match. We haven't done that in a while though, right? To match what we're getting in for free and reduced every so often as well.
Right.
Yes, that is true. We've had a waiver from that for the past few years because of the cash balance that we had.
Well, then we were also going to give every kid breakfast. And by doing so, then we can count all the free and reduced,
Right.
which would increase the amount that we would get from the federal government, which would boost up those federal sources of the USDA grants and
Exactly.
so on and so forth. And then it trickles down to where you can get into the black. But you're right. We've been, our enterprise system, they've been losing money. And you have to stem the tide. And we were certainly going that route. And then March 13th or whatever the date was,
But you're right, Mr. I think for an enterprise fund, your goal right now, of course, is number one is to at least break even, to offer the service that's not costing your school system.
I think at the time we were having a discussion and some people were saying we should raise them more at the time, and now we're behind the 8 ball, and now can't raise
Right,
more.
right.
I mean,
I think what we raised though, and I think that we don't want to make the mistake that you're right. I think that we didn't raise for a while, and then all of a sudden you don't want to raise with a big chunk. I think you do small raises, and I think that's why we implemented the small raise here, and then come back, see where you are. We may have to increase it again, small raises versus not touching it. Oh my gosh! And then the next
Right.
thing you know, you're really impacting. So, enterprise fund, if they're self-sufficient and they're running where you don't have to spend local dollars, then life is good. And that's your goal for both of those programs. Right now,
Absolutely.
feel much better about child nutrition. We still got some work to do on the other. As far as general operations go, the only thing that I would just like to say is check the consent agenda. I do apologize about the confusion of today's meeting time. That's on me. I just didn't get it out to you. I guess this retirement thing got me all excited, and that just slipped my mind. So I like to apologize. Please check the consent agenda for the next meeting. It's on there, so you make sure you have that down, and so there won't be any confusion there. Okay.
Kathy and I have some ideas on. We're going to make sure we get it all out to you guys.
And thank you, and it's an honor and pleasure to serve you as superintendent.
I will take a motion to adjourn.
Before we do that, I'd like to thank Ms. McCall for being here today and showing interest in our school system. Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take a motion.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.